If you lined up every British tank from World War II, the row would tell a very strange story. Tiny light tanks, huge armored monsters, fast cruisers, slow rolling bunkers. Some of these machines became legends, others were embarrassing failures, and a few were built in such small numbers that they feel more like experiments than real weapons. But there is one thing that makes British armor truly different. Britain split its tanks into two completely separate families. Infantry tanks, slow, heavily armored machines meant to walk forward with the foot soldiers, and cruiser tanks, fast, aggressive vehicles designed to break through and race deep behind enemy lines. This unusual idea shaped almost every British tank of the war. It explains why there were so many designs, why upgrades came so fast, and why some vehicles look confusing or even contradictory today. In this video, we will walk through the main British tanks and armored vehicles used in World War II, from the early disasters in France to the brutal desert battles in North Africa, and finally, to the hard push across Europe in 1944 and 1945. We will look at what each machine was supposed to do, what it actually did in combat, and why some of them earned respect while others quietly disappeared. Let's start with the very first British infantry tank to go to war. At first glance, the Matilda looked like a tiny fortress on tracks. Thick armor plates, small silhouette. A tank built to shrug off enemy fire. For 1940, its protection was impressive. Early German anti-tank guns often bounced off its armor. Many German crews were genuinely shocked when their rounds did nothing. But there was a catch. A big one. The Matilda carried only a single machine gun, no cannon, no explosive shells, no way to seriously threaten enemy tanks or bunkers. It was also painfully slow and cramped inside. The engine struggled with the weight. Communication between crew members was awkward and limited. On the battlefield, the Matilda behaved more like a moving shield than a real fighting tank. It could draw enemy fire. It could survive hits, but it could not deliver a decisive punch. Even so, it played an important early role. It proved that heavy armor could protect infantry on the move, and it opened the path for the much more capable infantry tanks that followed. If the Matilda was a mobile shield, the Matilda II was a hammer. This was the tank that truly defined Britain's early war armored power. It kept the same thick armor that terrified enemy gunners. But now it carried a real weapon, a 2-pounder cannon that could punch through most early German and Italian tanks. In North Africa, the Matilda II earned its famous nickname, the Queen of the Desert. Italian anti-tank guns were almost helpless against it. Even many early German guns struggled to penetrate its armor. For a crucial period, the Matilda II was one of the most feared Allied tanks on the battlefield. Crews trusted it. It was steady, durable, and could keep moving in heat and dust that killed weaker designs. But the Matilda II was not perfect. Its gun fired only armor-piercing shells, with no proper high-explosive round. That made it weak against infantry, anti-tank guns, and fortifications. The tank was also slow, and the design had little room left for serious upgrades. As enemy weapons improved, its advantages slowly faded. Even so, during the early desert campaigns, the Matilda II was a star. For a time, it gave the British Army exactly what it needed, a tank that could take hits and hit back just as hard. The Valentine was never meant to be a star. On paper, it was a simple, stopgap design. In reality, it became one of the most produced and most trusted British tanks of the war. The Valentine was compact and mechanically reliable. Its armor was thick for its size. Crews quickly learned that it could take punishment and still keep moving. This tank fought almost everywhere, in the desert, in Europe, in the Pacific, and on the Eastern Front. Thousands of Valentines were shipped to the Soviet Union. There, Soviet crews praised its toughness and reliability in snow, mud, and brutal cold. The main limitation was the turret. It was small. Upgrading the gun was difficult. As enemy armor improved, the Valentine's firepower slowly fell behind. Even so, the tank built a quiet but solid reputation. It was not flashy. It was not the most powerful. But it was dependable. And in a long war, that mattered a lot. While infantry tanks were built to crawl forward under fire, cruiser tanks were built to run. The early cruiser series, MKY MK2, MK3, and MK4, were the first attempts to turn that idea into a family of real machines. High road speed, good mobility. A tank that could race through a gap and cause chaos in the enemy rear. On paper, it sounded perfect. In practice, it was a compromise. Armor was thin. These tanks could not afford the heavy protection of an infantry tank. Their job was to move fast, not stand and trade blows. They used the same 2-pounder gun as many other British tanks. It was accurate against enemy armor, but again, lacked high explosive shells. That made them less flexible on the battlefield. Mechanical reliability was also a serious issue. Engines overheated. Suspensions broke. Dust and sand in North Africa punished every weak point in the design. These early cruisers were important stepping stones. They proved the value of speed and maneuver. But they also showed just how hard it was to build a fast tank that could survive real combat. If you want a clear example of a rushed wartime design, look at the Covenanter. On drawings, it seemed like a decent cruiser tank. New layout, low profile, modern look. But in reality, the Covenanter had a serious problem at its heart. Its cooling system simply did not work properly. The tank overheated far too easily. In training, crews struggled with constant breakdowns. In hot climates, it would have been a disaster. Because of this, the Covenanter was never sent into major combat. It spent the war mostly at home, used for training and exercises, while better tanks went overseas. Today, the Covenanter is remembered less as a weapon and more as a warning. It showed what happens when speed of development is placed above careful engineering. The Crusader looked like the perfect desert tank. Low, sleek lines, high speed. A true cruiser built for open sand and long distances. In North Africa, it became one of the most recognizable British tanks. When it worked, it was fast and agile. It could quickly shift position, exploit gaps, and outmaneuver many opponents. But there was a price. The Crusader suffered from serious reliability problems. Engines overheated. Suspension and running gear wore out quickly. Fine sand got into everything. Its 2-pounder gun was fine against early Axis tanks, but again lacked a strong, high-explosive round. For crews, the Crusader was both exciting and frustrating. In a good moment, it felt like a true thoroughbred. In a bad moment, it felt like a breakdown waiting to happen. Even with its flaws, it carried much of the cruiser tank burden until better designs finally arrived. When British forces in North Africa needed more firepower, help came from across the Atlantic. The American M3 medium tank, known to the British as the Lee and the Grant, was big, tall, and strange-looking. But it brought something the British badly needed: a 75mm gun that could fire powerful high-explosive shells. This side-mounted main gun, combined with a smaller turret gun, gave the M3 a very unusual silhouette. It was easy to spot. It was easy to hit. But it could also hit back hard. The Grant version, built for British needs, had an improved turret and better crew layout. In the desert, the M3 proved valuable. It was more reliable than many early British designs. Its main gun could destroy enemy anti-tank positions and deal with a wide range of targets. The M3 was never elegant, but it filled a critical gap until newer tanks, like the Sherman, and improved British designs, took over the fight. The early Churchill looked like a tank from another era. Long hull, tall sides, tracks running along the full length of the vehicle. At first, it was plagued by problems. Mechanical reliability was poor. Breakdowns were frequent. Repairs were difficult and time-consuming. But underneath those early failures was one huge advantage: armor. The Churchill carried extremely thick armor for its time. In tough terrain and close-quarters fighting, this mattered. The tank could absorb hits that would destroy lighter vehicles. It could climb slopes and cross obstacles that stopped many other designs. Early Churchills were not yet the legends they would later become. They were heavy, slow, and often frustrating machines. But they stayed in service long enough for engineers to improve them. Those improvements would eventually turn the Churchill from a troubled project into one of Britain's most respected heavy tanks. As the war went on, the Churchill tank changed from a troubled design into one of Britain's most successful heavy tanks. Engineers strengthened its mechanics, improved the suspension, and upgraded its weapons. Later, Churchills received better guns, more reliable engines, and numerous field modifications. In Italy and Northwest Europe, the Churchill showed its true value. Its thick armor allowed it to survive direct hits that would destroy lighter tanks. It could climb steep slopes and cross rough ground where many other vehicles could not go. The Churchill also became the base for many special versions. Flamethrower Churchills, bridge-laying Churchills, and engineering variants helped infantry break through some of the toughest defenses of the war. By 1944, the Churchill was no longer an awkward early war experiment. It was a proven, trusted workhorse that played a key role in Allied offensives. The Cromwell was Britain's first truly modern cruiser tank of the war. It combined good speed, decent armor, and a powerful gun in one balanced package. Its new Meteor engine, derived from an aircraft engine, gave it excellent mobility. The Cromwell could move fast on roads and still handle rough terrain without constant breakdowns. Armor protection was not as heavy as on infantry tanks, but for a cruiser, it was respectable. Its 75mm gun offered both armor-piercing and high-explosive shells, finally giving British crews a flexible weapon for many targets. The Cromwell saw extensive service after D-Day. It served in reconnaissance units, armored brigades, and command roles. Crews liked its speed, low profile, and responsive handling. In many ways, the Cromwell represented the moment when British tank design finally caught up with the realities of modern mechanized warfare. The Challenger was a specialized British tank built to carry the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun. This gun was one of the best Allied weapons against German armor. It could penetrate even the thick frontal armor of heavy enemy tanks. To fit such a large gun, the Challenger needed a big turret and a lengthened chassis. This made the vehicle tall and somewhat awkward in appearance. Production numbers stayed relatively low. Many units preferred to mount the same 17-pounder gun in more compact designs, like the famous Sherman Firefly. Still, where it appeared, the Challenger gave British armored units a serious punch against German Panthers and Tigers. It was not a perfect tank, but it delivered exactly what it was built for: strong anti-tank firepower. The Comet was one of the best British tanks to actually fight in World War II. It was essentially an improved Cromwell, with better armor and a new gun known as the 77mm. This weapon was closely related to the 17-pounder, but adapted to fit a more compact turret. The Comet offered a combination that British crews had been waiting for: good speed, strong armor, and a gun capable of dealing with most German tanks they were likely to encounter in 1944 and 1945. Its lower silhouette and improved turret design made it more practical in combat than some earlier tall British tanks. The Comet arrived late in the war and did not appear in huge numbers, but it pointed clearly toward the future of British tank design and set the stage for the famous Centurion that came after it. At the very end of the war, Britain introduced the first versions of the Centurion tank. Only a few early Centurions reached Europe before the fighting ended. They saw little or no actual combat in World War II, but their design was revolutionary. Instead of splitting tanks into slow infantry and fast cruisers, the Centurion combined strong armor, a powerful gun, and good mobility in one vehicle. It was the first real example of a modern main battle tank. Although it arrived too late to influence World War II, its roots were firmly in wartime experience. The Centurion would go on to serve for decades after the war. In that sense, it was the final product of everything Britain learned from its World War II tanks. Not all British armored vehicles were tanks. Armored cars played a vital role in reconnaissance, escort, and patrol missions. The Humber armored car was one of the most common British scout vehicles of the war. It was fast on roads, light enough to move quickly, and carried a small cannon or machine guns for self-defense. Its job was not to fight heavy tanks head-on. Instead, Humber crews scouted ahead, reported enemy positions, and guarded the flanks of advancing units. The vehicle's relatively simple design made it easier to maintain than many tracked machines. It served in North Africa, Europe, and other theaters, quietly doing the dangerous work of finding the enemy first. The Daimler armored car is often considered one of the best Allied armored cars of the war. It combined a powerful 2-pounder gun with good armor protection and excellent mobility. For a vehicle of its size, it packed surprising firepower. Crews praised its smooth ride and strong off-road performance. It could move quickly along narrow roads, cut across fields, and still keep its gun ready to fire. The Daimler armored car served in reconnaissance units, but it could also handle unexpected fights with enemy light vehicles and even some tanks. Its blend of speed, firepower, and protection made it a favorite among the soldiers who used it. The Staghound was an American-designed armored car that saw extensive service with British and Commonwealth forces. It was larger and heavier than many other scout cars. With its turret-mounted 37mm gun and good armor, it felt closer to a small tank on wheels. The Staghound was well suited for long-range patrols and security duties. It offered good reliability and plenty of internal space for crew and equipment. While it arrived later in the war and did not become as iconic as some British designs, the Staghound proved valuable wherever solid, wheeled firepower was needed. It stayed in service with various countries long after the war ended, showing how robust and adaptable its design really was. The Bishop was one of Britain's first attempts at a self-propelled gun. It mounted a 25-pounder field gun on the chassis of the Valentine tank. The result was a tall, boxy vehicle with limited gun elevation and restricted firing angles. On paper, it gave artillery units mobility and some armor protection. In practice, its high silhouette and cramped fighting compartment made it awkward to use. Crews often had to park on built-up ramps or embankments just to reach longer ranges with their gun. The Bishop was a useful stepping stone, but clearly not the final answer. It showed the need for better-designed self-propelled artillery, which would soon arrive in the form of more advanced vehicles. The Archer was one of the most unusual British armored vehicles of the war. It mounted the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun on a modified Valentine chassis. But the gun faced to the rear of the vehicle, not the front. This strange layout gave the Archer a unique way of fighting. It could drive into position, fire at the enemy, and then quickly drive forward to retreat, all without turning around. The vehicle had a low profile and strong firepower. This made it ideal for ambushes and defensive positions. Although it looked odd, the Archer was effective and respected. It proved that an unusual design could still be extremely dangerous in the hands of a skilled crew. The Sexton was a Canadian-built self-propelled gun that became one of the best Allied artillery vehicles of the war. It used the reliable chassis of the Ram and later the Grizzly tank, and mounted the British 25-pounder field gun in an open-topped superstructure. The Sexton offered mobility, good reliability, and a familiar, trusted gun for British and Commonwealth crews. It could move with armored formations and provide immediate artillery support when needed. Its open top left the crew exposed to air bursts and small arms fire, but this was a common trade-off for self-propelled guns of the era. Overall, the Sexton was a successful design that served well from Normandy to the end of the war. Before the Sexton, British forces used the American M7 self-propelled gun, nicknamed the Priest. It was built on a modified tank chassis and carried a 105mm howitzer in an open fighting compartment. A raised machine gun ring on the side of the vehicle gave it its Priest nickname, as it looked like a pulpit. The Priest provided mobile, hard-hitting artillery for British and American units alike. It could keep up with advancing armor and quickly deliver supporting fire. British crews adapted to the American gun and ammunition, valuing its high explosive power. Although eventually supplemented and partially replaced by the Sexton, the Priest played a major role in early and mid-war Allied offensives, from tiny scout cars to heavy infantry tanks and powerful self-propelled guns. British armored vehicles in World War II covered an enormous range of designs. Some, like the early Matildas and the Churchill, became symbols of stubborn defense and heavy armor. Others, like the Cromwell and Comet, showed how fast and flexible British tanks could become by the end of the war. Armored cars, such as the Daimler and Staghound, handled dangerous reconnaissance work. Self-propelled guns like the Sexton and Priest brought mobile artillery power directly to the front lines. Not every design was a success. Vehicles like the Covenanter and Bishop revealed the flaws of rushed engineering and experimental layouts. But even these failures taught important lessons. Together, this strange, varied family of vehicles helped Britain and its allies push from defeat and retreat to eventual victory in Europe. In the end, British armored design left a powerful legacy. It produced not only the tanks that fought in World War II, but also the ideas that led to post-war vehicles like the Centurion and shaped the future of armored warfare for decades to come.